Guys, so this is gonna be my first video on my interview with Casey Rojas. In this first half of the video, the part that I think is the most important and most valuable, I would say, is probably 1350, and I would check that out because in there Casey talks about the importance of lab internships, but kind of like the things no one tells you about. Yeah, let's just get right into the interview. Take notes, listen, and any questions, make sure to comment down below. Hi guys, I'm here with Casey Rojas, who's a federal lobbyist and he's an instructor of a bioethics course at Harvard. He's part of the Biomedical Science Careers Program and where he's a federal relations and health equity manager on that board. So hi Casey, would you add anything more to that introduction?
No, that sounds great. I guess the only other thing is that I also work for the JDRF, formerly known as the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation, as the advocacy team chair for the Massachusetts chapter.
Wow, that's really interesting. Thank you. So can you tell us a little bit more about like what you do, maybe like what type of person these types of like jobs would appeal to maybe?
Yeah, absolutely. So my background is in law, specifically health law. So I try to combine the interests that I have in philosophy, economics, ethics, and law into the work that I do as a federal relations and health equity manager. So I bring the economic perspective, I bring the normative philosophy perspective, the ethics perspective, and of course the health law and policy perspective into what I do. And what that is that I advocate on behalf of physicians for laws that we believe will help patients and help physicians provide quality healthcare to their patients. So it's a confluence of interests that leads to a job that is essentially working just in health policy and politics in hopes of improving healthcare for patients in the United States and worldwide even.
Nice. So we were talking about how before like this the kind of like job you have combines lots of different things. So obviously like law, but like a background in healthcare and we were talking about statistics and like data before. So like what type of person would you say might like this job might like maybe like appeal to?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this job appeals to a wide range of people, and I think
Hmm.
certain backgrounds help you perform better in this job. I think this sort of lobbying position appeals to people who have special interests, people who are particularly interested in whatever they're lobbying on. For me, that's healthcare. I'm very interested in healthcare because I've
Mm.
had intimate experiences with healthcare from a young age. Other people might be very interested in this job because they're interested in politics or policy or advocacy in
Mm.
general. How the government
Right.
works is a very important part of this job. And then I think for me, in the type of work that I do, it's very important to be able to digest vast amounts of information, whether that's literature pertaining to specific healthcare issues or healthcare research, or literature pertaining to politics, policy, government in general. So sometimes it's digesting information so that you can present your side of an issue, your argument on an issue in a way that is convincing and evidence based. It's Of course, they say stats are used for whatever interest you might have, but that's the important part: is being able to show that the evidence and data that supports your argument or your side of a position is objective, right, and is done with good methods. So the scientific method is very important. Data analysis is very important. Then obviously argumentation is very important. So if
Mm.
you're interested in any of those things, I think this sort of lobbying career could well suit you.
Yeah, that's so cool because you could have like many different interests, but like someone might think like you can only go into like this. Like maybe I'm interested in healthcare and I'm also interested in law, but you might think you have to pick one or the other, but that's not necessarily is the case, like the case as you've said. So thank you for that. Can you tell me a little bit more about like your journey, how you got started on this like interest in law and healthcare?
Yeah, sure. So I think the genesis of all of this dates back to when I was about 12 years old, and I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. That was my first experience of realizing how difficult the world can be to navigate for people with different abilities. And of course, diabetes is classified legally as a disability, which of course it is. It affects major activities of my daily life. I cannot eat or consume any carbohydrates without taking insulin. I need external insulin because my body does not produce insulin. I need external insulin just to stay alive on a daily basis. So
Mm.
at 12 years old, I was diagnosed with a diabetes, a chronic condition that I cannot get rid of, cannot be cured, and can only be managed. And I realized how the healthcare system was there to support people like me, right? And not every country has a healthcare system that can guarantee a quality life for those with type 1 diabetes, but ours could. However, that also came with the obligation to pay for a lot of those supports. Of course, insurance covered a lot
Mm.
of things, but I still had to pay a lot of money, or my family had to pay a lot of money out of pocket. And we were lucky enough to be able
Right.
to do that. But just navigating the health insurance system, the health system in general, um, brought up a lot of questions about how the way things should be, how
Mm.
our healthcare system should be structured, how we should be patient centered in all of our approaches to reforming healthcare and health insurance in the United States, at least. And so lots of these questions are legal questions. Lots of these questions are also ethical questions, right? We want to pass law and make law that is the most ethical, most equitable as can be. But sometimes those two things don't always line up. So when I first
Mm.
started practicing law, I did this in the realm of litigation. I defended doctors, hospitals, other healthcare professionals, and entities. And I was in court uh, practicing in defense of healthcare professionals. Um, I found out that my love of law was less the practice of law and more the philosophy of law. So at that
Mm.
point, I decided to shift my focus to something that was a little more policy oriented. And I went back to school to study bioethics. And that is where all of my interests align. Really developing or thinking about ethical frameworks for health policy, development of health policy and legislation that affects healthcare in the United States. So all of those things came to a head in the position that I have now, working as a lobbyist, where I get to advocate for patients, for physicians, for a better healthcare system, while at the same time thinking about the economics underlying those and trying to create a healthcare system that broadens access to more patients and
Mm.
maintains high quality of care. So all of those things, all of my interests really started with my first deep experience with the healthcare system when I was diagnosed with diabetes, and it just carried forward into my educational interests, and then my educational interests informed my professional interests and led me to where I am today.
Of course. So you could, yeah, of course, you could say that that kind of like sparked everything. So kind of like linking back to your type 1 diabetes, how would you say maybe that you've overcome certain like challenges or stereotypes like related to that and like maybe like getting into science and into certain fields that, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think you bring up a good point about the stereotypes. Um, I guess when I was diagnosed was over 20 years ago at this point. And the way diabetes was viewed is very different than it is viewed today. And 20 years before I was diagnosed, it was different than when I was diagnosed. Um, so the stereotypes for diabetics at the time were that you just can't eat sugar. Sometimes people would think that you got diabetes because you ate too much sugar to begin with. So there were these stereotypes that went around about what a diabetic is, what they can eat. And so anytime I picked up something to eat around my friends or their family, they were like, "Are you allowed to eat that?" And this comes from the goodness of their heart, right?
Mm.
They just wanted to look out for me, make sure that I wasn't doing things that would harm me. Um, but that played into a stereotype is always having to answer to people, yes, of
Mm.
course I can eat this. I'm allowed to eat this. I just have to take insulin. But then, of course, anytime I took out a syringe to inject myself with insulin, that came with many questions. Anytime I pulled out my insulin
Mm.
pump, that came with questions. There are all sorts of questions you have to face. So I think that's probably one of the sort of hidden burdens of living with a chronic disease is all the questions you get from people. And of
Right.
course, I don't shy away from questions because I think the way to get over that sort of hurdle is through information to educate people. Of course,
Mm.
that can be exhausting at times. So sometimes you give them the short answer. When they say, "Are you allowed to eat that?" You say yes. Sometimes when you say, then when they ask, "Are you allowed to eat that?" You say yes because my diabetes impacts me this way, and this is how I manage it. So for me, it's a lot of education. That's how I overcame a lot of those hurdles to begin with. But then there's things that you just can't overcome so easily, such as hypoglycemia during a driver's test or during a law school entrance exam, right? Those are things that you have to manage in the moment very acutely, but they have a large impact on my performance and my scores in on tests and things like that. Um,
Mm.
but that's just one of those things I'm living with. I've always had to live with, well, not always, ever since I was 12, had to live with. And you learn how to incorporate the management tools that you have at your disposal into your daily life so that when something like that, like hypoglycemia, low blood sugar, happens during a critical moment, you know what to do. And it's just second nature to correcting that issue and moving on. So yeah, I think a big part of it is preparation. It's just all preparation and education. The more you educate yourself about, first of all, how other people view your issues. I don't think of them as issues, I suppose. But if I can know more about why people think I shouldn't eat a certain thing, then I better know how to understand or better know how to respond to them in those situations. And if I better know how to manage my diabetes, then when an issue does arise, I can manage it very quickly.
Right. So like you were talking about, it's kind of like about perspective, like because as you said, with your diabetes comes like all these questions and all like this, all of this can, which can be like really annoying and like stereotypical, but also like as you were saying, like you learn, you like educate people and like some good comes out of it. And like, I think, would you say that you've maybe like grown to be like a strong, maybe like a stronger person, or you've like, you obviously like learned a lot. You, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think I've definitely learned a lot, and not just a lot about facts of diabetes and facts of what I need to be doing, but about people and about
Mm,
myself. And I think that's perhaps
mm.
the most important thing is um, learning about myself and how I can better respond when faced with questions that are based on stereotypes.
Right. Thank you. Now, kind of like connecting back to something more like scientific, I just wanted to ask, like, how important would you say field work is kind of related? This can be like related to a lab internship or any kind of sort of like internship in a science field. How important would you say that is?
Yeah, so field work is a great opportunity to gain experience. And a lot of times it depends on how much you put into it. What you
Mm,
get out of it depends on how much you put into it. But sometimes it's just not gonna. It might not be beneficial for you in one way, in the way that you perhaps intend it to be going into it. But I think even in those situations where you start an internship, start some field work, and you thought it was going to be something different than what it turns out to be. You need to take a chance to think about what you can learn from the experience. And I think that's not always the easiest thing to do. But one thing you can do if you're caught in that situation is just to take a minute before making any decision, whether that's a decision to leave that field work or internship or change the field work or internship. Just take a minute, see it through for a little bit longer, and that way you know if there's anything that you can learn from that. But I think field work is exceptionally important. You can sit there and read a book a million times and not really understand how the world actually works until you're out there in getting that sort of experience. Of course, some field work is better than others. And sometimes you can get more out of it than get more out of it than you can from other things. But it just all depends what your goals are, and I think that's a really important thing to think about anytime you take on a new endeavor, is to remember what your purpose in doing this is. If your purpose is solely to put it on a resume, I think
Mm,
perhaps you need to rethink why you're doing it.
mm.
So it should really be for yourself first, and then think about the external stuff later when maybe you're deciding between two different internships or fieldwork experiences. But everything you do, fieldwork or otherwise, you need to be doing it for yourself first.
Right. So yeah, kind of like related to what you were saying, like when you have multiple opportunities presented to you and maybe you have limited time, you would say that like genuine interest is the most important thing to consider when you're like faced with these opportunities, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I think genuine interest should very much be a top priority when deciding what you want to do or what you're going to do, because then it's so much easier to put your full self
Mm,
behind or into your work that you do there, and you can get way more out of something that you have a true interest in.
exactly. Thank you.
So that was the first half of my interview with Casey. I hope you guys learned a lot, and any questions, anything you want me to kind of like analyze in further detail, don't be afraid to comment down below, and make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys soon.